mankind must learn how to solve our international problems without bombing each other. Martin King said before he died that either we learn to live together on planet Earth as wise men, or we should perish as damn fools. We on a collision course with our own survival on this earth because of the sophistication of the weapons that exist today. I grew up hunting and fishing, and I'm proud of it. I grew up in South Louisiana. Como ça va? I speak Creole. I grew up on the bayou. The guns I grew up with, shoot one time, mostly 6 times. They got guns today that can shoot 60 times in 5 or 6 seconds. So our ability to destroy our bodies because of the technology is 1,000 times more than it was when I was a kid growing up. We have to figure out what to do about our propensity for violence in our society. God bless you all.
Oh, thank you.
Now, y'all have any questions? Let's get some ground rules. There will be no math questions.
No what?
No math questions.
Oh, okay.
No arithmetic questions.
Who wants to be first?
I think it's an honor that you're here and that you were at the Lorraine Hotel. I was there. It's now a civil rights museum
Yes.
in Memphis. Tell me about.
Look on the walls and you see my picture. I had all my hair. That was good.
Oh, really?
That's before I raised children.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. The question is, James Earl Ray, was he still denied, I thought at the end, that he ever killed Martin Luther King. Is that true, or?
Yeah, he
never would.
capitulated
No, he
and
never.
admitted that he did.
Yeah.
And we believe that there was more to the assassination of Dr. King than a single gunman. That there's some still unanswered questions regarding Dr. King's assassination. How involved was the United States government in Dr. King's assassination? How involved was J. Edgar Hoover? You know, where did the money come from that this kind of penny ante criminal was able to get his hands on?
Right.
So that's some unanswered questions. But our looking back ought to be to look forward and not get tied up with yesterday. Because there's nothing we can do about yesterday. Right? Yes, sir.
Yes, do you have any, well, you've said that amongst the ethnic communities that there's a lack of jobs and hope and so on. Do you, in general, have any policy that would reverse this, create jobs and so on? And what do you think of the current two parties in terms of their job creation programs, so forth?
You don't have no easy questions.
I never ask easy questions because.
I have a program that deals with ex-offenders. I have over 1,200 ex-offenders, and they're predominantly black, but they're not all black. I try to work with all ex-offenders who get released from Texas prisons, and my belief is that if I can help you get a decent job and have decent income, I reduce the chance of you going back to prison. Yep. And if I can get you a good job where you become a taxpayer as opposed to the taxpayers having to take care of you, that's what prison are. That means we taking care of him, having to pay for his lodging, his security, his food. It is bad investment for taxpayers and for sane societies. It is a real bad investment. The recidivism rate in black America is more than 70%. In less than 36 months, more than 70% of black men who get out of prison go back to prison. And primarily it's an economic question. So, regarding the two political parties, first, social change don't come from the top, it comes from the bottom up. You know, politicians tend to protect their political future. And that's the nature of politicians. I do not expect political parties to solve the great challenges that we face, because first it makes them uncomfortable even to talk about it. So all of the great social change that America has that had the opportunity to experience over the last, say, 50 to 75 years came from the ground up, not from the bottom down. In other words, Lyndon Johnson signed the right to vote. We made him do that. You know, the public accommodations legislation that came out of John Kennedy's White House, we made him do that. Birmingham. You know, I mean, it was people forcing the government to pay attention and working together. So I think that there is a unique difference between the political parties. You know, I think the Republican Party, talk about a party that has a unique internal problem. The political base for the Republican Party is primarily people call themselves Tea Parties and evangelicals. But the dilemma that the Republican Party faces is the money comes from the business community. The business community is run by people who are educated and sophisticated. And of course, you don't think that the people who run all companies are stupid. No, they aren't. But they are the dollars that fund the Republican Party. So right now, inside the Republican Party, they're involved in an internal conflict over some of the great social issues of our time, over what to do about our gay brothers and sisters. You know, should we continue to discriminate? I tend to believe that we all God's children, whoever. I mean that, you know, and I also tend to believe that just like, you know, if I could have been born a white man, I'd prefer to be born a white man. Just like I don't think nobody gay would prefer to be born gay. I think they would have preferred to be born straight. You know, that's just not a decision. That's a decision made on high, not down here. So, if we're gonna, you know, the gentleman that's in the White House today, I think that is a great, tremendous achievement for us as a society, for the American society. But that does not mean that social change is going to come out of the White House. No, politicians don't do that to make the White House play fair. I mean, it's just the nature of politics, you know.
Just a brief question. You mentioned the story about George Wallace coming to that church and apologizing. Can you give me a time frame, the year, or anything that gets it a little closer in time?
There's a whole movie about it. There's a movie about this experience in the church. The actor who played the African American man who brought him to the church was a fella I knew who was on something called Mod Squad years ago. If you're my age, there used to be a TV series called Mod Squad. I don't remember his name, but he played in the movie regarding this experience at Ebenezer at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He played the big, bold, muscular black man that brought George Wallace into the church and pushed him in. Now it's hard for the years tend to come all confused in my head now.
About 68.
Dr. King died in 1968, so this movie, I mean, this experience was probably somewhere in the middle 70s.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. But you ought to be able to find it because there's a movie about it, you know. Now, I've never seen the movie because that kind of stuff makes me cry. Yeah.
Yeah, another question. What's your take on the progress after the civil rights legislation? Obviously, it was good, but how effective do you think it's really been in your own personal opinion?
Well, first it would be naive and dishonest to say we have not come a long way. You know, I mean, we have come a long way over the last, say, 50, 60 years. But that does not mean we have resolved our differences. There's a movement going on now that basically says Black Lives Matter. And this is a message from young Black America to white America that's saying Black Lives Matter, and that Black lives ought to matter to white America. But in saying this, we have to also face the reality that if Black lives does not matter to white America, I'm afraid Black lives matter less to Black America. In other words, a African American young man between the ages of, say, 18 and 40 stand a much better chance being killed by another African American man between them than he does by a white man, because there is a deep self-hatred that Black people suffer from. I'm talking about in terms of each other, and the criminal justice system perpetuates that hatred. In other words, see, if I kill you, I ain't gonna never see the light again. I can kill another Black man and be out of jail in 15 years because the criminal justice system makes decisions based on pigmentation, what color the killer is and what color the killee. So, your first question, we have come a long way in terms of our social justice in America. But that does not mean that we have solved our problems, because we have not. And we ought to be wise enough and honest enough to be able to sit down and begin to grapple with our problems and solve these problems. Yes, sir.
When I was growing up, my father was a fourth-state regional director for Project Head Start. And I grew up in an environment where we understood that Head Start was a valuable tool in giving a hand up to the Black community. And I don't know when I became aware, maybe the mid-'80s, that it appeared the culture had changed in a very subtle way, and there was an entitlement culture, a culture of not a hand up but a hand out. And I'm not sure, I almost put it back to LBJ and wonder if perhaps LBJ may have had some things he did that were not positive for the Black community. I know back in the mid-1940s, most Black families had fathers, and we've had such a drop-off, and now we have so many single-parent families, and that has a direct result on imprisonment, it appears. What's your comment on that?
I can take you to West Dallas, to Bonton, and I can introduce you to the third generation of welfare recipient, third generation of public housing recipient. That is a vicious cycle. I can introduce you to the third generation of people their relationship to money is with the waiting for the mailman. So, just as slavery crippled us as a people, we have to get over that. The welfare state has crippled us as a people. It has taken away first ambitions. When you have generation after generation after generation who sit down watching soap operas, wait for the mailman, baby. Because the mailman gonna bring me some food stamps, gonna bring me some money. Now let me show you something else. That's a unique problem regarding unwed mothers. Let's say that I am a 17-year-old African American girl living with my mother and my grandmother in the projects in West Dallas. If I want to get my own apartment, my own check, and my own food stamps, all I got to do is get pregnant. Yeah? So if I get pregnant, I can get my own apartment and get out of my mama's apartment. I can get my own food. Then if I have some more babies, I get an increase in food stamps and an increase in my check. You know. So now, is that in fact also a form of slavery too? Because it destroys your ambitions.
Both in the wrong direction.
Yeah, but poverty, the poverty of Black America has to be solved by Black America. The government can't solve this for us. And the only way to solve it is through business. We have to develop, first a business attitude, a commercial kind of business attitude toward business. We have to develop, in this generation of kids with all size pants they wear, you know, that if you can be a successful dope dealer, you can run a McDonald's, baby. Because it's harder to run, look at here, it's harder to be a dope dealer than to run the Burger King, you see. So we have to change, and can't nobody do this but us, you know. Y'all pray for us that we can do it, but this is things that we must do ourselves. And because there are some inherent discrimination problems that has to be associated with economic development. You know, banks that won't loan money unless you want to buy a Cadillac. If you're Black, you know, you can get the money for that kind of foolishness. But now, if you want to open up a business, it's hard to get banks to back you up. And we've tested the banks by sending an African American in with all of the qualifications and with everything, with business ideas, and he's turned down. Then we take a white man and send him in with the same, but with less credentials and less, and you get funded. And not just one bank, but we've tested all of the banks, so there is a whole pattern of discrimination when it comes to banking, redlining. So here again, there are no simple solutions, but your observation of the destructive problems with the welfare system is a legitimate observation. And I wish I could duck it, but I can't.
It's a massive problem.
Yes, you know, because you got generations now. Like I said,
Easily,
I can just
Tom.
introduce to the third generation.
What do you think about the,
Wait a minute, you need a mic.
what do you think in regards to the drug problem being exacerbated by various different government entities that are involved in smuggling drugs into this country or assisting with that process?
Well, the whole banking industry. I mean, there is a reality of government and financial institutions involvement in drug culture. That's just a reality. I don't. There's a reason they call dope dope. I mean, just dope. Just think about the word dope. Yes, sir.
Yeah, another question. But by the way, the third generation on food stamps is also a white problem. It's prevalent in England, and it was brought about by the destruction of proper manufacturing jobs. Okay, that's in England. Same problem, different color.
Yeah,
But the question I wanted to ask is, there's an expression that if you have paper on you, let's say you've been to prison, that stays with you almost forever, and it's
permanently.
and employers see that, and it's just almost impossible to get a decent job. Is that correct? And what do you think about that? You talked about forgiveness, and yet supposedly in this society, most societies, if you go to prison, serve your time, that's it. Your slate should be wiped clean and given a fresh start. But if you're not, by the society, that says you weren't forgiven. You didn't really properly serve your time, and basically you've been written off. Now, what's your comment on that?
I wrestle with corporations almost every week on that issue. sending men who are qualified to work, to jobs that's available. When they fill out an application, if they put down that they're an ex-offender, they're not gonna get hired. If they don't put it down, because we've got this technology today, you can push a button and get everybody's history. As soon as they find out that they're gonna get fired, as soon as they find out, I wrestle with corporations every day, and my argument with corporate leaders is, listen, it is economically stupid not to employ these people, because you force them back into prison where taxpayers have to take care of them. It is better to have him being a taxpayer than to have the taxpayers taking care of him. And regarding the manufacturing, there used to be manufacturing companies all over Black America. South Dallas had manufacturing companies. And those manufacturing companies, they moved to Korea and to China and to South and Central America where they can cheat people out of their labor, and left those places where, unless you want to cook French fries and fry hamburgers, you can't get a job in most of those areas today.
Tell me about the segregation in this city.
Oh, well, Dallas is an extremely segregated city. It is a very, very segregated city. There's still neighborhoods in Dallas that if I drive through those neighborhoods after 11 o'clock, I may get stopped just because I shouldn't be in the neighborhoods. You know, driving while black could be a crime. So not only that, there are neighborhoods in the southern sector where it would be very dangerous for white people to drive through those neighborhoods, say, after midnight on a Friday or Saturday night, because you stand out like a sore thumb, because there's so much segregation here in terms of the housing patterns. That there's a school on Martin Luther King Boulevard, I think it's Madison High School. It's 98% black. So it is literally a segregated school. And to show you how dangerous, I spoke there last February for Black History Month, which I'd like to talk about a minute in terms of, but I spoke at this high school for Black History Month. This is a high school that's 98% African American kids. Each class at this Black History program had to present an African American historical figure. Each class had to come up and present an African American historical figure and tell something about it. Every historical figure that the classes presented was either an athlete or an entertainer. You know, not the scientists, not the doctors, but the athletes and the entertainers were their historical figures. And I thought Michael Jackson was pretty cool. I'd be damned if I thought he was a historical figure. He was a singer and a dancer. So that says something about, and you can't blame the children for this. You have to blame the education system itself. And if you think LeBron, I talked about my relationship with LBJ. Then I asked the students to stand up and tell me some things about LBJ. You know who they thought LBJ was? LeBron James. These are high school students. No, but you laugh at this, but this is not funny. These are high school students, Yeah.
Are you aware of this new movie that Chris Rock is making?
I've been told about it.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
I've been told about it. That he's a very smart kid.
Very smart. How often he gets stopped by the police because he has an expensive car, like 3 times a week, 3 to 4 times a week.
Yeah.
Really sad.
I had a friend who's dead now, who's an African American doctor, and every 2 or 3 years he would buy a brand new convertible Mercedes. Dr. Mason, and he's passed on. In fact, he was killed. Dr. Mason bought a home in Duncanville, one of the first African Americans to buy a home in Duncanville. Dr. Mason would get stopped going home literally every night, pull out of his car and searched.
Horrible.
I mean, yeah, and sometimes he would have his scrubs on, the hospital scrubs that he's a surgeon, that surgeons wear, and his stethoscope hanging around his neck, and they would still put him out of his car and search him. And actually, what are you doing in this neighborhood?
Any more questions? We got a lot of questions.
Well, I obviously I missed the first few minutes, but many people ask the question, where were you on the day that JFK was killed, as most people remember? I guess I would ask that.
Exactly where I was. I was on my way to class. I was a
Yeah.
student at Southern University, undergraduate student, on my way to class. And of course, the death of JFK, for those of us who was in the student civil rights movement, that kind of shocked us, because this was the first time somebody was in the White House who was listening to us. The civil rights students wrote a song for Jackie Kennedy the week after JFK's death. Dear Mrs. Kennedy, we heard about your tragedy. Freedom is coming and it won't be long. Tell Robert Kennedy he's still in his prime. For the presidency, he still got time. Freedom is coming. So it meant a whole lot to us. So you know how much that meant. Years later, I remember the lyrics to that tune that we wrote for Jackie Kennedy.
On a note of hope, and to get your response on this, is I do see a move towards integration in, of all places, the churches, where a lot of people will come together in some of the churches anyway. I'd like your comment on that.
The most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
If we can't learn to worship God together, we're not going to ever solve this problem. There shouldn't be any such thing as a white church and a black church. I mean, there's just not. I mean, there shouldn't be anything such as a white church or a black church.
Amen.
I have a friend here, Bill Harris is his name. Bill is a 77-year-old white man who used to work for LBJ. I've known Bill since LBJ was in the White House, when we were going in and out of the White House, lobbying for the Voting Rights Act. Bill he's from Oklahoma, but he's been in Texas most. It's like, what the Bill on? Bill loves black churches. He loves the music and the rhythms and the preaching, and so he goes to black churches regularly. And when he sat down in a black church, everybody come up. And the look is what he's doing here. And he goes to worship because he loves black churches. So we've got to hopefully first be honest enough to talk about these things that divide us and not get angry. One of the things that I'm working on right now is peace officers, police departments. I believe that there's something wrong with our society when, like in Dallas, you've got the Dallas Police Association, which is the white boys. You got the African American policing. They're unions really, but they don't like you to call them unions, but that's really what. Then you got the Hispanic Police Officers Association. So you have three unique, separate peace officers association that does not have a relationship with each other. In other words, you got a segregated police department that the white folks got their association of their union, the black people got their association of their union, the Hispanic people got theirs. I think we ought to make them have one police association. That peace officers ought to have one damn police association and not three segregated ones.
I was appalled recently, this week, about Mr. Hinson, who was in jail for decades.
30-some years.
Because, and he was innocent. And it was he was there because he had inadequate defense during his trial, and also his when they asked to retry, it was ignored. Do you think that this will bring on a discussion about the death penalty? Because I think that it's a classic example of why we should not have a death penalty.
Well, first, absolutely, but from California to New York, the prisons are full of black men and poor white men who sitting in prison for crimes they did not commit. Prosecutions aren't necessarily based on hard evidence. They're based on the prosecutor's ability to win cases because his career is so you see, prosecutors. I have my youngest brother is a retired judge. He was a judge for 30 years. He was a judge in New Orleans, in Orleans Parish for 30 years. He retired. He teaches international law in Johannesburg, and I think constitutional law at Loyola, New Orleans. He has fought the Louisiana criminal justice system for 30 years. He is the judge who decided that Angola prison was full of young, poor men who did not have money to hire lawyers. So the system appointed them a lawyer. The lawyer convinced them to plead guilty to crimes they did not commit. So his name is Calvin. So Calvin released thousands out of Angola prison one year, and there was threats on his life for doing it. You know.
First of all, thank you, God. You're just awesome. I'm just so glad. I'm just sitting here crying because it's awesome what you've done. Everything that you've said in your work. While we're on prison, can you speak to the for-profit industrialization, the creation of these warehouses for minor offenses, and back to what John Beasley said, you get marked. You're marked for life. And some of these guys are driving around, they have a bag of pot or something. You're not, and one other gentleman here spoke one night and says, well, I grew up in Highland Park and we had weed too. And I don't know, I
That's more
just,
dope in Highland Park than in South Valley, because
anyway.
it's got no money, you know?
But I mean, in other words, you've got, and what they're spending on this. I mean, you see business as a, you know, jobs and business is obviously one major part of the picture or the solution, but education would be the other. And why are you spending this kind of money, these resources?
The warehouse.
And
Yeah.
you need the education, and maybe you need supermarkets, you need decent businesses in West Dallas where people can work, where the teenagers can come up. These are all opinions from me, but I'm asking you for your thoughts on these, that as possible,
First, let me respond to how unjust the criminal justice system can be regarding drugs and narcotics. And it's not just based on color, it's also based on money, the haves and the have-nots. I have a friend who just died recently from Highland Park. Extremely wealthy white man that I've known for many years. He was a cotton broker. He made his money in cotton. But a very wealthy man. Some years ago, his son ran into the back of a police car. The police was parked at a red light. This young man runs into the back of the police in the middle of the night. And he was so high that when the police come out of their car and opened up the door to his car, he just fell out on the concrete. That's how high he was. They searched his car. He had 3 kilos of cocaine in the trunk of his car.
Wow.
How much time do you think he done?
No.
He done one night. The night that they put him because the daddy wouldn't go get him. He done one night in jail. Then he spent time at a fancy drug clinic, rehab place, somewhere out in California, somewhere where rich people go. But some real slick place that's got to have plenty of money to go to. And then he got, I'm trying to think of the word, adjudicated. He got a deal that says if you don't screw up no more in X amount of years, now you're gonna be on your record anymore. Now, if this was a rich white boy, if this was a poor white boy, he'd still be in the penitentiary. If he was black, he never would get out of the penitentiary with 3 kilos of cocaine. So the criminal justice system is fundamentally unfair, and it is causing taxpayers a tremendous amount of money to fund it. And the fact that we've got prisons for profit, I'm trying right now to get a Hispanic lady out of prison. This lady is literally in prison because she made an illegal turn. Now she had a criminal record here, so she was on probation. But the reason she's in prison, because she made an illegal turn and didn't have no money. So she went back to say they put this woman, she's in prison because her crime was she made an illegal turn. And of course it's because, you know, her skin is brown, she ain't got no money. I mean, and if my brother Calvin wasn't down in South Africa, I'd get him to come here and help me fight this.
Well, and you know, I've heard stories that you've got whole communities whose, so they lobby for the continuation of funding to these private, privately owned for-profit prisons.
But you also have elected officials, politicians with stock
So, yeah, and I mean,
in those institutions.
to me, this whole thing, I mean, it's just like it's something that is so wretched, and so, you know, you can say, how can you this is up to you all to do something about it, but I feel it's up to all of us to do something about the kind of fundamental problems in our legal system.
What made the civil rights movement so great is because the civil rights movement wasn't a black movement. It was an American movement. Let me tell you something that's going to shock you. Do you know more white people and Jews died in the civil rights movement than black people? Did y'all know that?
No, say that again, I did.
More white people and Jews died in the South in the civil rights movement working side by side with us than black people died. Most people don't know that. When I call names like Viola Lewis and James Reed and these people who lost their lives, we literally allowed society to forget them. Earlier I said I want to say something about African American History Month, the month of February. Well, you know, one of the unique things about getting old like I is that you can admit mistakes. This was a mistake we made, forcing this Black History Month. This is a mistake that we made that we need to fix this. You see, because what we have done was segregated history. In history, what is history? Stuff that happened yesterday. That's all history is. We have segregated history. So I had a conference last Saturday with white and Hispanic and black kids who graduated from Highland Park High. They were home on their spring break. And I wanted to talk to them about Highland Park High. One of the things they told me was that at Highland Park High, they were taught that slavery wasn't a big thing in Texas. That there were very few slave owners in the state of Texas. This is Highland Park High. That the Civil War didn't have anything to do with slavery. These are college students, and they're there in colleges all over the United States. They were also taught that they weren't taught anything about the history of Highland Park. In terms of, I came to Texas in 1969. In 1969, a black man couldn't drive through Highland Park after dark. I had a staff that we trained down here at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I got a call one night after 12 o'clock in my apartment in South Dallas, collect call from the Highland Park jail. Two of my staff members went to a SMU basketball game. Coming from the basketball game through Highland Park, stopped and arrested on this thing called suspicion. Now wait. They told me how much cash money they needed to get out of jail that night. So we scrapped up the money from some Dallas Cowboy football players that I knew to get the cash money. Me and another fellow, lawyer, drives out to the Highland Park jail to bail them out. You know what they done? Arrested us.
Say what you said?
Arrested us.
Okay.
Yeah. For having the audacity to come out there after midnight. So Highland Park has a unique, ugly history. But I believe that, not just here in Texas, but all over America, that Black History Month sends the wrong message. The message it sends to white children and white teachers is that Black history is not American history. It's something less than American history because we have to only spend 28 days dealing with it. It creates a sense of superiority in white students. And black students, it sends a message that your history is not American history, it's something different and not important, because you only spend 28 days. So it creates a sense of inferiority in black children. This is something that we're going to have to fix. We're going to have to figure out first how to inject black history in American history books. Right now I'm looking at Texas history books that's being taught in Texas schools. Other than Martin Luther King, there's very little about black people in Texas history books. I mean, and one of the great historical things that take place in Texas is the Alamo. We all know about the Alamo. The Alamo is a unique part of Texas history. The reason we know about the Alamo is because there was a slave at the Alamo owned by a man named Daniel Boone, named Joe. Joe could read and write. When Santa Anna conquered the Alamo, he spared Joe's life. Joe made his way down to Houston and wrote the story of the Alamo. The reason we know what happened in the Alamo is because a black man wrote the story and gave it to the Houston newspaper. His name was nowhere to be found in history textbooks. And now I'll tell you something else. Joe has a direct descendant who works for the Department of Agriculture under Barack Obama in Washington, D.C. You know, this history is American history. This is not black history. There's no such thing as black history. It is all American history. And we must figure out a way how to inject this history in American history books.
I have a question. I have a question. And first a comment. I was at a justice walk yesterday, and a woman had a sign that said one out of 100 citizens in the USA is in prison. Obviously, many of them are men and women of color. Does that statistic sound reasonable to you? 1 out of 100 citizens? That seems quite shocking.
No, that's...
But secondly,
Yeah.
Is there any correlation between what's going on in the schools, public schools, where they're just kicking out students willy-nilly? I mean, you know, the kid's done 2 or 3 things, most of which wouldn't have even been paid attention to when I was at Woodrow back in the 50s. Kids did all sorts of stuff. It was a white school and probably rather privileged. Today, especially with poor people, these kids are really put out, so to speak, from the public schools. 3 strikes, you're out, that type of attitude. Does that have anything to do with the numbers of men and women of color who are in prisons today?
Yeah, the school system is destroying the sense of somebodyness in terms of African American Hispanic children because of the way the school systems treat them. In other words, my parents, my mom and daddy, and the church I grew up in, gave us a sense of being somebody, that we are somebody. I went to an all-black school, segregated school from Louisiana, so there was no integration. We had to walk to school across the tracks to go to school. But the school and the teachers, I had an uncle who was a principal, gave us a sense of that we were somebody, that we were important. The message that the school system sends to black and Hispanic children today that you are nobodies, and your sense of being somebody is literally destroyed. That's why you have this attitude of nihilism of this generation don't care. That's why they're so dangerous, because they don't give a damn about living, dying, going to jail, not going to jail.
Any more questions? Are we out?
Yeah.
You get to sit down.
Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Okay, now it's your turn to talk, so who wants to be first? Any remarks, rebuttals, for or against? Your choice. Come on up here, John.
Oh, Ray.
Ray,
Oh, Ray.
John, whoever wants to go first.
All right, John.
Yes, well, it was a real privilege to hear you speak firsthand about Martin Luther King and so on. Well, 47 years ago, it was April 4th. I was still in England. I was just about to get on the aeroplane and come over here. But when I walked up the high street in Barnet, where I still have a house, to get my ticket, Martin Luther King had been killed and so on, and the travel agent said to me, "Are you mad going over there? You know, what are you thinking about?" Anyway, we came, and because I was educated and Xerox hired me, it was really a wonderful life for me and my new wife at the time. But getting back to the society, really, in England, of course, and in Europe in general, we do not have the death penalty. I mean, it was abolished over 50 years ago. We just don't have it. The amazing thing to me is that we have so many Americans left alive with all these guns flying about. I mean, it really is. I mean, when I grew up in London, you never saw a gun. Nobody had a gun, you know, and the death rate was almost non-existent. Here, everybody has guns, and so who can be surprised when this death rate is so high? Also, you touched on incarceration and forgiveness. Now, what has amazed me about this so-called Christian society is there is a definite lack of forgiveness. They just they look at the Old Testament as if it's part of the New Testament. To me, they're totally separate things. Eye for an eye, so on and so forth, lack of forgiveness, that's Old Testament stuff. It's got nothing to do with Christianity. And so that's something I talk about a lot, but it's true. Americans must take a good look at that. I mean, listen to the Lord's Prayer about forgiving others, other trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. That's the message out of the New Testament, and that's what I think should be preached. Now, I think I've often talked about this. Is the government needs to fund startup businesses, really. That's what it has to do. There's a lack of businesses, as you say, and everybody knows we shipped good jobs overseas for pure greed and colossal stupidity. I mean, these politicians, both parties that have stood by and watched this happen, should be indicted. Their American flag badges should be ripped from their lapels. They've destroyed this damn country. They really have. And that's swearing, but really, that's how I feel. I watched it. When I came, it was a great country. Everyone had jobs, but they've just destroyed them. And they've destroyed the country. And it's the poorest, poor whites and poor blacks, poor Hispanics that have really, taken the brunt of this. So it's no surprising, as I say, once you have paper on you, you can't get jobs. And as I said before, crime is an equal opportunity employer. And how can you blame people that turn to crime when you can't get a job? Or at least if you can get a job, it's so ill-paying you can't, Now back in the 50s and 60s, one man could work, his wife could stay at home with kids, and one man could support a family. That's not true of the average working American anymore. A husband and wife have to work, because the situation is, when the man works, we can pay him less because the woman's going to work, blah, blah, blah. Well, and so we have women now have to go out to work, so she's not at home to look after the kids, to make sure they're home on time, they do their homework and all the rest of it. The society needs to stand back and take a good look at itself. And same in England too. Because these greedy people have paid the politicians, and they're just about destroying the country. And I have a deep contempt of all politicians. I mean, really, because I see them destroying the Western societies. And so how can you tell when a politician is lying? His lips are moving.
Well, I've been sitting there, thinking to myself, now, how am I going to present this, and what am I going to say? And I keep thinking about different ways to say it. Anyway, I'm looking at this, and I can see that we're at evening or lecture number 270. Well, it just so happens I was there at number 1. And the guy who presented at lecture number 1 lectured against capital punishment. He was a college professor, and he was very much opposed to capital punishment. Well, it just so happens, I've said this before, and I hate to keep repeating myself, but it just so happens that, one of the highlights to my professional career is that I spent 20 years as a psychologist for the federal prison system. So, as a result, I definitely, have an attitude, and I've always been in favor of capital punishment. And I remember that evening arguing with this college professor, about capital punishment, and my big argument was, why should we pay for, this guy's room and board, when he's just not worth a bunch of crap, or something like that. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I'll watch my language. Anyway, I was going to do worse than that, and I cleaned it up. Anyway, well, that was my argument at the time, and I've maintained that attitude, but recently, I've been kind of wrestling with this thing. My wife is not in favor of capital punishment, although she was at one time. She's changed. My daughters, and so I've really been, I've been considering this one part of my attitude, and Peter, listening to you tonight, I think probably it's time to really get serious about this, and I think probably I'm changing to the other side. So.
Well, it has been an interesting talk. I think we have all benefited from that, and I sure enjoyed hearing that. Since I was the one who spoke last week, I couldn't help that the antenna goes up when he is confirming at least more than maybe 2 points that I mentioned last week. And I just probably mentioned in passing, but I says we've got to have equality under the law. Peter mentioned equality under the law. Now, I have no idea how we are ever going to get back to that. Our country was founded on equality under the law, and we're getting further and further away from that. We're never going to have any perfection, but until we as people are going to be firm and demand it, however that could possibly work out, we're just going to have distorted situations where blacks are treated different than the whites. We've got enough laws, so they ought to be applied equally and have that forced. A second thing Peter said, was about the black family and the welfare. He said tonight that the welfare has been ruinous to the black family. I said that last week. I quoted Walter Williams, Walter E. Williams.
I know Walter.
You know Walter?
Yeah.
Okay. Economics professor at George Mason University, Fairfax, Virginia. He writes regular columns. I had the words more precisely last week, but I'll see if I can remember those. He said about the black family, the black family endured decades of slavery. Then they endured a civil war. The black family endured more decades of Jim Crow laws after the Civil War. Then they endured the riots and upheaval of the 60s, only to be undone by the welfare state. Walter E. Williams. And that is so true. Whenever you destroy the family, you're going to hurt or destroy the people. Even under slavery, as horrible as that was, the families were together. Those children in the families knew who their daddy was, and they saw him every day.
No.
And when you don't have strong families, you don't have a strong country. You don't have a strong unit. You don't have strength. When the family breaks down, the country will begin to deteriorate. It's just, that's why when you have a destruction of the family, like in the in the 60s and the welfare state, it's just going to hurt everybody. So an answer, a remedy would be to strengthen, encourage, to build good families, not just the black family, but the whites as well. But until the black family can be strong and where kids could know their father and be trained, you talked about your family, that you were worth something, and you went to schools and they told you you had a future and you were worth something. The kids are not getting that now. And when they're not getting it, they're just not going to succeed. And it's like I said, it's not just a black problem, it's a white problem too. The life and strength of a country is going to be in its families.
Well, I'm so sorry I got here late. I got into a Mark Passio recording and just lost track of time. And John is recording this good, so I'll get to review it. The first thing, I'm just still in a state of shock, John, over your swear word. I just never thought I would hear that. I grew up in the 40s and 50s in a small town in north central Florida. When I was 2 years old, we moved down from from Georgia, where I was born. And my dad, during those, I used to love the tales that he would tell us. He had a friend whose name was Rufus, and he bought him a shotgun, and the two of them would go hunting together. My dad loved fishing and hunting. That's why we moved down to Florida. I can remember when the hunting dog that Dad had, that he just loved like a child, was walking along and just disappeared down in the ground. Well, they went over there and they found that there was an abandoned well that had wood boards on it that had rotted out, and the dog was at the bottom of the well, and my dad was just in tears about that. And Rufus said, now, of course, you know, back then there were lots of accents, and he was saying, now, Mr. Bob, you just don't worry. I'm going to go get a rope, and we're going to get Rufus. We're going to get Fanny out of here. And he went, did that, and came back and made a noose and dropped it down. Talked to Fanny and got her to put her head in the noose, and he pulled the animal up and saved it. And of course, Fanny was so happy about that Fanny knocked them both flat on their backs while she or he, I forget, proceeded to wash their faces, which they needed. And so that was a wonderful tale. George James moved down to Florida with us, with our family. George James, when I was 2, 3, 4 in there, was probably the closest, other than my mother, the closest human being in my life. He was a black man. He moved down with our family. He would, whenever, we lived a few blocks from the train station, and a little single-track train station, whenever I'd hear the choo-choo whistle, I would squeal about it, and he'd put me in the basket on his bicycle and pedal me down there and hold my hand while we watched the train come and go. And he was always there for me whenever I'd cut my finger real badly. He took care of that and so forth. And he became a Protestant minister in Ocala, Florida, where we lived. And just a man of just great dignity, in my opinion, a loving human being. And I'll always remember that man with the deepest sense of love. Excuse me. To think of anyone as being less than those who are created equal under our Declaration of Independence. Being equal under the law is inferior to that. We are equal under God. And that applies to all mankind. And the vehicle that we happen to be strutting around in, called our bodies now, is a temporary thing. The spirit of what that person is inside is what the Creator has made. And we need to apply this to everyone we ever conceive of, including not only the blacks, but the American Indians and all others. And the divisions that we have that I think are so artificially placed upon us through the centuries, the largest one probably being religion, cut us up into this little group and that little group. I think there are, 300 Christian religions or something like that. And of course, well, you didn't say these passwords, so you're probably going to go to hell. You won't be taken up in the ascension or whatever the belief system is. All of these are divisive, and they separate us. And people in one religion think, well, we're superior to the others, so we're the ones that God loves, and so forth. All of this needs to be thrown out because it is absolutely opposed to the truth that is universal in this entire universe about all mankind, of all races, all species, even those we don't know anything about. And there's a multitude of them. More and more evidence of that if anyone's interested. But I can't wait to take the time to watch the video that John is making of this, because I'm sorry that I came late. But the little that I've heard really goes to the core with me because of the experience I've had growing up in a time when there was a lot of racial prejudice. All the black people lived on the other side of the railroad tracks in Florida during those years. But I am so grateful that I had both the wilderness to get away from a lot of the conflicts of humanity, and had George James and the stories of Rufus and things like that, and Mammy, who was our kind of our housekeeper up in Georgia. She would put all of us little kids in the strollers and push us around, and she would talk about her kids and how proud she was of them and so forth. She just took us in with love, and that applies to all mankind, is love.
I haven't given a speech since 1964, but anyway, I like to say 68 April, about this time of year, I was on a rock and crow squad in Fort Carson, Colorado. 40 buses was taking us to walk, all over the country. All of a sudden the master sergeant said, let's go back to the barracks, everything's called off, so we went up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the barracks, big barracks that wasn't ours, the hallways was all lit up, and the pool room, and the orderly room, and all that. We just lay down on the floor anywhere we could find it, 200 or 300, 400 men. The only place available for me was underneath the pool table, and Martin Luther King, I think, was buried that day, and I saw the march on TV, and finally I put a newspaper over my head and put me on 14 on my chest and went to sleep. And then next thing I know, I woke up and there was nobody around. I went up down the hallway, not a soul nowhere. And all the noise they must have made, they didn't wake me up. So I got my equipment, ran down the hill where the buses was, about 2 miles away. And of course, Master Sergeant Bergen told me I was lucky I wasn't AWOL, because the bus is about to leave. So all the guys getting on the buses, 40 buses, and then the third bus left, and I didn't get to get on it, and then the guys ran us, so we backed off, and all of a sudden everything was called to a halt. So the last 80 guys didn't even get on the bus, and we went back to the regular barracks. But I remember that parade. Where was that parade at? I mean, that burial. Okay, there was a motorcade type of caisson. Yeah, I remember seeing that night on TV. But anyway, I just thought I'd say that. But as far as the violence is, the police was banging on my bedroom window trying to wake me up, and flashlights all over my house last Tuesday. I didn't hear all the gunshots, but the neighbors called the police, and about 8 or 10 of them was walking around my house looking for bullet holes. I didn't hear nothing, but anyway, there's people out there just shooting the guns for the fun of it. In Wyoming, there's one other statement I like to make. You know, all the problems in the last, I'd say 20 years, in a way, I blame a lot of this stuff on myself and everybody else, but you know, our fathers, the greatest nation, the greatest generation was supposedly my father's generation. They went to war, they came home, and they tried to raise a family, better jobs, better car. But while they was doing that, the same thing happened. I think John Kennedy wrote a book, maybe he didn't, he had some help, called Why Britain Slept. And the same thing has happened to us. While our fathers slept and we slept, the politicians did things to us that we might not ever be able to undo. But if I was to write a book, that's what I would write about. Why America slept and our fathers slept, and we're part of it. So, I appreciate it.
Sir, I think I met you once a long time ago.
Sorry?
I think I met you once a long time ago.
Okay, wait a minute.
If I had a beard, it wasn't me.
I think when I was a little kid, I sat on your knee one December.
Okay, who's next? Come on up here.
I will always remember when Martin Luther King was murdered and, was killed. I was in Florida, and I was a child welfare worker, and I was in charge of a shelter for black children, and there was a shelter for white children, and at the time they were segregated, and the shelter for black children received half the money the shelter for the white children received. And when Martin Luther King was assassinated, I went upstairs to watch what was going on in the television, and I was the only white person watching. And next thing I knew, I was called in an office, and I was asked if I was a communist, and I was soon let go. And there was only other time I was ever asked if I was a communist, and was here in Dallas. So that's what it was like, and that was Fort Lauderdale, which is Broward County, and right now it has the second, next to Cook County, the second largest Democratic voting bloc in the nation, but at that time it was Jim Crow all the way, it was in the sixth, it was killed. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, who's next? Gotta be a next. Have we got a next? Are we running out of people? We still have plenty of time. Come on up here.
All right.
John Gentry.
Well, I almost don't want to bring up the subject matter, but it's been such a nice presentation. I forget really what kicked things off, how I started investigating this, but does the name Freeway Ricky Ross mean anything to you?
He left Los Angeles.
Yeah, he was dealing drugs for the CIA, or the Central Intelligence Agency. Catherine Austin Fitz, formerly HUD administrator, I think is someone who had a particular insight into what was going on there. If you bring crack cocaine into a neighborhood, then that trashes the neighborhood. The property value goes down. The property value plummets. Certain investors are able to buy up that property for pennies on the dollar, and then things are cleaned up, and then they have a great windfall there, windfall profit. Catherine actually created maps of how this was being done in Los Angeles. Michael Rupert, a former LAPD narcotics officer, had charts of kind of the revolving door between the CIA and Wall Street. How people would move right over from the agency into key positions in Goldman Sachs and other prominent Wall Street players. And that this had really been always the way, going back to the OSS. The bankers are not our friends. And what I fear is we reach a point where everyone is viewed as a product, as a commodity. And that's races involved, but really I don't think anyone is quite immune from being considered a product these days, or a commodity, something to be capitalized upon. It's a very sad state of affairs, and what I was probing was whether there was any awareness of how benign LBJ's policies really were toward the black community, and how the Great Society actually worked out. Politically, I think it was a success, but unless you are assessing the actual consequences, the results on a community, and seeing how things are going, that's irresponsible. But I think it goes beyond irresponsible. I think I see a hand in actually dismantling the black society. And one of the opinions I have is, and I would juxtapose John Beasley's position on this, is it seems whenever government gets involved in anything, things become worse. Sometimes it takes longer than other times. One black man I was inspired by was Charlie Smith. Charlie Smith was, I don't remember the name of his local organization, or which city, I think it was Philadelphia or something like that. Charlie Smith was founding what he called the Do Nothing Party. And the platform of the Do Nothing Party was that you get people to run for political office that pledge that they will run for political office. If they are elected, they will do nothing. They will pass no laws. And Smith's philosophy on this is that everything sunsets after a time, and over time, things would get better again. We'd have less government involvement in this, that, or the other thing. And Charlie Smith was very charismatic in his presentation of that. And he had me sold on it. So people look to government as the solution. The war on drugs is just this horrible example of what's been done to this country. There was a time during the turn of the century, 1900s, 1910, you could even order heroin. It wasn't illegal at that time. It was sometimes even prescribed. Cocaine was available. The original recipe for Coca-Cola, and one of the reasons why it's still very proprietary is it was the coca in the Coca-Cola. And I actually recall in my youth, I imagined perhaps maybe I was getting a little extra buzz once in a while from those Coca-Colas, but maybe that was just my imagination. So anyway, with regard to integration, I think that I'm very sad to hear that the speaker is saying that the churches are really the worst example. Not the church I'm going to. The church I'm going to is very integrated. And I would say you can vote with your feet. If you are attending a congregation that is not integrated, by all means, you can find one that is. One meeting, worship, I'm enjoying is Smoky John's Barbecue, Tuesdays. It's a noon prayer, worship, Bible study. They have some excellent singing. You can find me there most Tuesdays. And it's truly inspiring. And Smoky John is a black man. Tell you what, it's the Spirit is really moving with those people. You get to heaven, it's integrated. Thank you.
Anybody next? We got any more next? We ran out of people? And the last one stayed in? I got 5 minutes, my wife says. All right. Well, one of the things was brought up about less government. I just heard that. I think if you go back and look at what government has done sometimes, it's good. In 1938, they passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. They shortened the workday from 10 hours to 8 hours in this country. Put a lot of people back to work. In fact, it got us out of the Depression. And today, we have the same problem all over again. If you look at, we have, as he brought up in his speech here, we have so many people unemployed, underemployed. We have a situation that's really bad in this country. The underlying problem is since the Industrial Revolution, machines were replacing people. Machines don't pay taxes, people pay taxes. The only way society can possibly share in the wealth of its capacity it produces in working hours, the only way it can be done. Chicago, where I'm from, is the home of the Haymarket riots. That's where people have been displaced by automation. United campaigned for an 8-hour day. That was in 1886. In I forget the year, 1916, they passed the Adamson Act, which created an 8-hour day in the railroad industry, which was 8 hours. There was a single time after 8 hours. Prior to that time, there was no overtime at all. And that began to put people back to work. In 1938, they passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, reduced the workday from 10 hours to 8 hours. And it was a federal law, not a state law. It only affected interstate commerce. They didn't cut the pay. They got the same money in 8 hours, used to make it 10. Big business didn't like it. They screamed like stuck pigs. They go to options. They could have small business get around the restrictive labor law, or spend money, become more productive, and produce more or less time than competition. Small business did in more time. Within 5 years, big business and labor went to each state legislature, put the states on a shorter workday because misery loved company want to eliminate their competition. That's how we got the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week. I think maybe it's time to go to a 6-hour day and a 30-hour work week. We could re-employ 25 million people in this country that are no longer employed. We could put our economy back in shape. But we have a problem with that too, because our corporations would flock together and leave the country to go where labor costs are cheaper. That's one of the things they're very good at doing. So we need to put tariffs on corporations. We can't put them on countries anymore, because WTO and all these different programs we put in effect and we've bought into. So we put it on other countries so that labor costs put the onus on the labor on the corporations. Then they put tariffs on corporations equal the difference in labor and environmental costs. They want to produce things here. Then we could shorten the workday and without fear of them leaving the country. But the corporations control the Congress, and we can't get the Congress to act responsibly against the corporations. That's one of the problems. So we have to take action to have the Congress pass something that will go for, that will help society. So when push comes to shove, Congress will act to have free airtime the last 90 days of a general election. That hasn't been done before. They'd be able to, the challenger would get an edge over the incumbent. Some challengers might win. The incumbents will vote for it. There's no history of a challenger beating them. If a challenger beat an incumbent, then the congressman that we elect would end up representing the people instead of representing the people buying their vote in Washington. Then we could put tariffs on corporations, shorten the workday without cutting the pay, reemploy 25 million idle Americans, and grow our economy without fear of the dollar being knocked off its pedestal as a dominant world currency. That's what I see we have to do. Anyway, you're up.
You made it.
You get to respond to all the comments that were made and close this meeting. You get the last word.
What, first, listening to the various comments is the evidence of how difficult it is for us to find common ground. Listen to my brother here who grew up in northern Florida during that unique period. One of the interesting things about the southern states and the years of Jim Crow is the kind of weird relationship that existed between black families and white families. Right. Kind of a weird relationship. When people passed on, their funerals were integrated. You see, when the woman you call Mammy died, white people went to her funeral. When the white woman who hired her, whose kitchen she worked in, when that white woman died, Mammy went to her funeral as well. A unique, weird kind of relationship that existed between families in the South. In spite of the colored and white signs, and in spite of the absolute segregation, there was relationships between families. The laws of Jim Crow enslaved both whites and blacks. The gentleman who talked about the destructive realities of the welfare system, those are sound observations, and we have to find a way to talk about them. You know, it is more complicated than just the fact that we have created a generation of people waiting on the mailman. The question is, for me, should not be first about laws, but our moral commitment. We ought not allow children to be hungry in the United States of America. You see, we ought not allow people to live under bridges in the richest nation in the history of the earth. Now, we ought to be able to do these things without creating a behavior pattern where it becomes profitable for a black girl or a poor Hispanic girl to get pregnant so she can get an increase in her government check, in her government food stamps. We have to figure out a way first to be able to talk about these difficult issues and come up with realistic solutions. Now, because I grew up in a household that had a mom and a daddy, see, I couldn't bring seeds home because in my household, education was important. The church I grew up in, education was important. When I would get my report card, I would take it to church and give it to the pastor. And on a Sunday morning, he would read, okay, Peter, you got a A in reading, 50 cents. You got a B in math, 25 cents. The church was involved in promoting the concept of education in those poor black communities in the rural South. We've lost that. My father had a third grade education, but I couldn't make C's and survive. So that was a commitment to that generation to education. Now, I have 2 children that's grown and married and educated. And I spent my morning with my 2 grandsons this morning, took them to an Easter egg hunt at a church. One is 6 and one is 9. And tomorrow after church we're going to catch the horses and ride the horses. Because my grandparents spent time with us. And I cherish those days and nights that we spent with my grandparents. I worry about little black children growing up in these inner cities who don't know who daddy is, don't have grandparents like I had, and don't have a father. You know, like when I was a little boy, wearing your shirt out of your pants was a style for my generation. You know, wearing your shirt out your pants. But if I left home, I had to have my shirt in my pants neatly. Once I got away from the house, I could take my shirt out of my pants and hope somebody didn't see me and tell my mother. You know, on my way home, I could put my shirt back in my pants. I'm saying this because what's wrong with a 14-year-old boy walking around with his underwear showing? What's wrong with that is mom and daddy. Here, see, because you don't expect a 14-year-old to have no sense, you know. But you have to have somebody that's a parent that's parenting. And we've lost that. And the government is a part of the responsibility of that. But black people also is a part of the responsibility of that. And we can't duck that. We have to become honest with ourselves to fix these problems. That was one other point I wanted to make was that regarding my brother who talked about the death penalty. Unjust means can never lead to just ends. The ends you seek to achieve, the means that you use to achieve those ends must be as noble as the ends you're trying to achieve. You cannot use unjust means to achieve just ends. That ain't gonna work. It is a unique kind of contradiction. In other words, you cannot teach a society about murder by doing murder. You know. Now, and I talked about the dilemma that existed in the civil rights movement after the assassination of Dr. King. How it literally tore us apart because there were those who felt that James Earl Ray should be executed. The state of Tennessee felt that they was going to show black America that they was just as hard on white killers than they was on black killers. And we got caught in the middle of this fight. And the King family was torn asunder because of this fight. But here again, if we believe that first, if you kill somebody through execution and find out a couple of months later that it was the wrong person, you can't fix that. You can't fix that. We should not use the tools of human destruction to teach that human destruction is not right. Companies that profit through the drugs they create off of murder by states. Now the state of Utah say that they're gonna just go on and shoot people. You know, so in Utah, if you shoot somebody and commit murder with a gun, Utah gonna shoot you and commit murder with a gun. It is kind of neurotic behavior when you think about it. I believe in the teachings of the New Testament. The greatest challenge from Christ, the man we call Jesus, the greatest challenge is forgiveness. Now when I preach at black churches all over America, I tell black people that we have to forgive white people for this history. It pisses black people off. There's no other way. There's no other way for us to resolve our racial divide other than through forgiveness. There's no other way. And I also tell black people, this question of forgiveness, that's not Peter's deal. That's Jesus' deal. See, that ain't my deal. That is Jesus' challenge to people who have the audacity to call themselves Christians, that we learn to forgive. White people cannot be free in America as long as they're scared of us because of what have happened to us. We cannot be free in America until we forgive white people for this history. God bless you all.
Well, that's it for tonight. We're gonna retire. We retired, we have to be out here by 9, just so you know. And, our speaker is welcome down to Starbucks down the street here. We're gonna go down there. We'll buy a coffee down there if you like.
You said that highway I'm gonna Google it. I'm a beautiful person. I've learned about that business of the almost strategic introduction. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, God bless you.
I don't know that much about it, but I
was hoping you'd tell everybody about Smokey John.
Oh, we've been friends. I go over there and eat more than I should, and every now and then I have time to go by his program. Yeah, but you know, Smokey lost his wife.